Tuesday, 29th March 2022. Today is 9 Serpent Day in the Earth Mover time wave. I have a page of notes in front of me. What am I going to do with them? They're still forming. There's a bunch of little astrological symbols. There are dates from different calendar systems. There is a rather large portion of the page dedicated to our Intuitive Community Private Membership Association and Intuitive Community Privacy. There are a number of fresh Telegram spaces launching. Groups are coordinating to make statements from each group, which is a very difficult thing to even entertain. It's hard for me to say. We're all going to say what we need to say successfully. Generally, there is a statement that each group wants to make and then build out in different individual group-focused ways. But the essence of it follows a familiar template. We and our allies are committed to coordinating with survivors groups to build and stabilize disability recovery aid infrastructure that prevents human trafficking in all community locations. Strong statement. So, infrastructure. Do you remember when I could not flip pages? I still don't flip pages very much, but I used to not be able to flip pages at all. It's very exciting. We're producing disability recovery aid infrastructure through public media collaborations and private media collaborations. Those who we have been working with who understand enough of this to work with us when we reach out and we say we want to make your content reachable by these most severely affected community members and people who have been excluded from community resourcing. Because what we're communicating to our allies is, you are producing something that heals people who cannot reach practical resourcing. You are producing something that, if individuals and families are facilitated to be in relationship with your community when they have been stripped of so much other resourcing, the relational, interpersonal interactions are massively reparative for people who are encountering extreme hardship, and it's extreme hardship that is based on taking away people's relational resources, taking away people's ability to communicate effectively. So for instance, with the content from sarahwestall.com, we take the most helpful content curated by our survivors groups for the information that Sarah is publishing that is most essential to what we are collectively communicating and what all of us individually are encountering. Ouch. whoa, all of us are individually encountering in our various circumstances, that curated content is not only shared as is, it is separated into very small, more easily absorbable pieces for people who are affected so severely by extreme neurological injuries and other physical injuries that the only way they could ever come into contact with this content is if they had the experience of belonging to a community where drips of that content are happening a little bit and a little bit in the periphery and can be focused on as part of group activities to restore mirror neuron function and the ability to focus on something that benefits us rather than capitulating to violence that is meant to get us to focus on things others want us to focus on, the robotization of living beings. We address this directly by creating media environments with many of the same kinds of ambient entrainment technology that trafficking organizations are using, that criminal multinational conglomerates are using. But when we use these tool sets, we make sure that we are using them towards honoring living beings, towards caring for our environments, making sure that people can unentrain themselves, disentrain themselves, deprogram themselves, and then in a self-led way, with sovereignty, reprogram the self the way the self is naturally meant to be. Who are you inherently? You have the power to be who you are inherently. And if you have been influenced by ambient environmental programming, we can restore your awareness and resourcing and capacities for doing your own self-led reprogramming. And that is what is necessary when otherwise all our environments have been co-opted by all of this ambient entrainment technology that does traffickers' jobs for them, so that when they want to accomplish something, they can do it easily. When we want to accomplish something, we want to do it easily. So we redevelop all of these access points so that they do not function in the service of trafficking organizations any longer. They function in service of the living beings in our communities. When people have been very severely neurologically injured, their brains work very differently than you may expect. And most of our environments have been co-opted and influenced in ways that cause us to misunderstand neurological injuries, to misunderstand the kinds of brain damage that are occurring, the damage to people's communications, the damage to people's linearity or non-linearity, different kinds of seeming linearity based on scripts, people's very different healing processes. When a psyche is profoundly affected, the psyche can really re-emerge in a different way to avoid the pitfalls of the violence that has been occurring. Because brains are so different, and because the violence has been intentionally stopping communications, destroying communications, and isolating us, cutting us off from one another in all of these different, often under the radar ways. When we drip tiny little bits of content into conversations where there's public content that survivors cannot reach, there's private content that survivors cannot reach, if we have friends with whom to work through, to process, to learn about a particular thing, then we can have public conversations talking about important public content that those community members would never have access to without our conversations and without the adjustments of the media packaging If something is an hour long, many of our community members would never be able to absorb that, would never be able to understand it. But if we drip little pieces of it as part of conversations and interactions and working together on subjects that are important to us, then people get to really be part of that conversation and therefore part of the community. So we have individuals who cannot even click through an interface to have an account with Ebener, which is Sarah Westall's offering, cannot operate the web pages in the way that they would need to, and the emails to sign up for Planet Wave's private content streams. And yet, because we have growing relationships with both of these organizations, the public materials that are published, we can create group activities around, which is a disability recovery aid, which is neurological repair in a real physical way for members of our groups who would never know about that stuff otherwise, who would be totally vulnerable to the co-optation of trafficking organizations that do know how media needs to be organized for people who have been very severely neurologically injured. And trafficking organizations are doing that in a way that draws disabled people into increasing situations of co-optation. We must, as media professionals, be using all the tool sets at our, I don't want to say disposal, all of the tool sets that we have at hand must be used to restore what has been stripped away and co-opted by trafficking organizations. And we can do that right now in the way that we package materials. So we've said, can we syndicate your content? And some people have responded to that, thank goodness. We have said, we want to connect your content to our disability recovery aid infrastructure so that our community members can participate in your community. Many of them are already part of your community and you don't realize that because they can't communicate with you without help. And if they've even managed to get into a position where they could sign up for a membership, you might never receive almost anything from them, even though it is crucially important for them to be able to interact with your community spaces, simply because of the disability circumstances that have been instituted by trafficking organizations in a way that people in their communities would not understand or be able to recognize or notice. So now we can notice it. So when we reach out to an organization and say we want to coordinate with you and your private media and public media communications to connect to our disability recovery aid infrastructure that is restoring recovery privilege for survivors of the worst, most invisible forms of violence, Sarah Westall's content is helping us do that, because Sarah is in that relationship with the Intuitive Community Network. Eric Francis Capolino's content is helping us do that because Planet Waves is in relationship with the Intuitive Community Network. And there are a lot of other allies that we can talk about the amazing successes we have been experiencing getting this incremental, what was I just going to say? Adjustmentally packaged, differently organized media content, incremental, differently organized media content that is specifically coordinated to be supportive of and accessible to the minds and hearts and brains and physical circumstances of people who have been and are surviving such extreme situations that their lived expertise and true survival professionalism is necessary to have as part of all other communities to protect all communities from the influences of trafficking organizations, which these survivors and groups of survivors know so much about. And we can all communicate with one another much more effectively when we establish this kind of infrastructure and use it every single day. Private and public media disability recovery aid infrastructure restores and ensures safe, inclusive communications access for safe, inclusive community resourcing. Please come closer, learn more, and build this with us. T.me/intuitive public radio. Thank you for listening.